at heart, I really desired not to have Emily Ruff's Sage Mountain, but for all the thousands of folks that have been touched by this land to be able to continue coming here, and more folks to be able to continue coming here, for this not to just be sold to a private landowner and then never have access again.
Right.
There's so many prayers have been planted in these forests over the last 40 years. So that was really kind of my intention, was this land just remain open and accessible for all the healing that it's given people over the years, and for that to continue. So I started a nonprofit organization to purchase the property and the center from Rosemary, and to carry on that legacy.
Welcome to the Herbalist Hour. This is where community gather, merging the power of people and the flowers, the sweet and the bitter to the salty, the sour. Umami, it's time for the Herbalist Hour.
Welcome back to the Herbalist Hour. Today I'm incredibly excited. We're here at Sage Mountain hanging out with Emily Ruff. Welcome to the show, Emily.
Thanks, Mason. Thanks for having me.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about the land that we're on? First of all, what is Vermont like ecologically, and then kind of talk a little bit about the land. By the way, dear listener, we're going to go on a little tour with Emily later on, but for now, let's get to know Emily a little bit more, and maybe just like an introduction to the land.
Yeah. So Sage Mountain Botanical Sanctuary was founded in 1987 by Herbalist Rosemary Gladstar as her teaching center and center for earth stewardship, a space for humans to reconnect with the land and with plants and with each other. And so we are in unceded Abenaki territory in central Vermont, just about 20 minutes east of the capital of Vermont, Montpelier. Where we're at right now is about 2,000 feet elevation, and the peak of the mountain that we're situated on is about 3,200 feet. And so we are, the state is Vermont, the Green Mountains.
Right. Vermont.
Is a very verdant place in the summer, a very white place in the winter, very verdant place in the summer. So our 600 acres is situated in a 46,000 acre contiguous roadless forest with some of the highest priority biodiversity, which means rare ecosystems, important natural communities, rare plants like showy lady slippers, which are blooming right now. Hopefully we'll go see those with our guests today.
Stay tuned.
So we have here we have about 5 acres of maintained gardens for pollinator plants, medicinal herbs, flowering plants, and then the rest of the land we have about 12 to 15 miles, of trails.
Wow.
And then the rest of the land is just forest habitat where our wild ken, the bears and the bobcat and the moose and the fisher and the fox, allow us graciously to cohabitate with them here, and lots of birds, endangered species, plants and birds and pollinators and things like that.
Did you say we're the pink lady slippers guest today?
Yeah.
I love that. I've never heard it put that way.
Yeah, we're definitely the guests of the plants and the animals that I consider them really gracious to let us cohabitate here, and through their tracks and their scat and occasionally walking in the forest near us, we get to see a glimpse of them and their hospitality.
Awesome. Well, we're going to cover a lot more about Sage Mountain. By the way, this is our first time, me and Amanda's first time, not only in Vermont, but Sage Mountain and all the above. And I'm just absolutely stunned. Like coming from Oregon, seeing all those trees. Actually, this might be a good opportunity to talk about the clear cuts you were talking about earlier. I was saying in Oregon, when you're going through the West Cascades, you see clear cuts all the time. And then being out here, I didn't see too many. So could you tell us why that might be?
Yeah, so in the 16 and 1700s, the settlers really wholesale clear-cut this state. Yeah. There's very little old-growth forest. We're really lucky to have a little sliver in the wetlands toward the west of us, lower on the mountain, but it's very rare to encounter true old-growth forest here in Vermont. But in the time that the forests have been regenerating, I believe that the more modern settlers of this land have really taken to heart how important the forests are. The timber industry is not only an important economy of Vermont, but it's also how we build our houses and how we keep warm in the winter. So I think there's really something to be said for thinking about sustainable forestry and practices that can not only build our houses and keep us warm, but also some of that selective logging can actually improve the habitat and the ecosystem of the forest for the trees themselves and for the wildlife.
Selective logging as opposed to full-on clear cuts.
As opposed to clear cutting. So you see a lot more selective logging in the mainstream timber industry here than I think you do in states like Oregon. We also are really blessed to have leadership in some of the top agencies here in the state, like Agency of Natural Resources, that identify the value culturally, economically, and environmentally of protecting the habitat that's here. So you see a lot of it. I was just in Montreal last week at a summit with the Department of Fish and Wildlife Commissioner, the Secretary of Agency of Natural Resources, with a lot of folks from Maine and New York and Canada. And I think Vermont really stands out as a state that is prioritizing the protection of these natural resources and striving to protect connectivity and large landscapes for the role that they play for us as humans and plants and economy and wildlife and culture and all those things.
That's awesome. You must be a proud Vermonter. Then.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah.
Well, let's. Speaking of which, we were talking about pre-show. You're from Orlando, or at least from the area, Florida. I'd love to hear more about your personal background. Sometimes I ask this question. The audience appears to enjoy it. What was a young Emily like?
Oh, I like that question. My father was a botany professor and an astronomy professor. So as a little girl, I was following him to his college classes and sitting in the front row around all these folks a lot older than me learning. But more so just really learning from him out in my backyard. I was 2 years old when I learned my first binomial, camphor, cinnamomum camphora at the time. Now it's cinnamomum brevifolium.
Is that a cinnamon?
Camphor tree is is a cinnamon genus.
Okay.
Yeah, relative of the cinnamon tree, but a really ubiquitous plant throughout Central and South Florida that migrated over from Asia and is used for, listeners will be familiar with like camphor oil in your herbal blends and in, mainstream things like tiger balm and stuff like that. So I, at a young age, had this really close relationship with plants. On my mother's side, my grandfather was a sustenance farmer. He was a fifth generation tobacco farmer that had moved off his family farm and into the city, but still on his, maybe half acre of land, a good chunk of it was growing vegetables to feed the family that we would eat every night at dinner. And when I was 4 years old, he made a little plot on the edge of that garden where I grew my peppers in that first season. So I had these, two elders and family members in my life that were really significant in building and instilling a love of plants and of nature in me that, you would find me when I was, a young girl, literally out in the woods, doing the things that I imagine a lot of our peers do,
totally.
like, mixing things in a concoction and like playing with the, animals and the plants and the trees and
That is so cool. Yeah, I find a lot of herbalists either have that type of background or a lot of times later in their adult life or early adult life, they're trying to solve a problem. And that's how they get thrust into herbalism. I have to ask about your grandfather. Was he a tobacco farmer for, the Florida cigar industry?
He was in North Carolina when his family was,
Okay.
So it was like a multi-generation tobacco farm that they were on in very rural North Carolina.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I would also kind of follow that by saying that, I deeply loved plants and nature, but I was never in those environments introduced to plants as medicine. And so I was really thrust into herbalism by solving a problem. When I was 18, I traveled to Guatemala just to kind of be an 18-year-old getting out of the country and traveling.
Right.
But I was in a small village working actually with a Catholic mission, and my sort of volunteer exchange role for my room and board was volunteering at the local doctor's house, which was really a local healer. Yeah. I mean, he had some access to pharmacy, but most of the work he was doing was with the plants in his backyard, and entire families would hike 2 hours from a finca to this little village where we were to see this doctor. And, we would sing and we would pray and we would make food. And then he would, look at the patient, and then we would go in the garden and he would teach them the plants and how to harvest them and how to make the medicine and send them on their way. And that was a just, eye-opening, mind-blowing experience to see that paradigm of medicine, which I had never seen growing up. But then I got sick literally on the plane ride back to the United States. And went to the doctor and got a cocktail of medicine, and then a couple weeks later a couple days later, another doctor, and like hospital in and out, and just like had 2 weeks of really serious illness, and was able to get, this was before like email, so like a telegraph down to the village to find out, like what should I use, and I got 2 days later a message back of plants that in Florida uniquely were growing because it's quite a similar climate to Guatemala. And one of them I could also find at a local health food store. And, my symptoms resolved within 2 or 3 days after having taken medicines for weeks. And at that point, like many herbalists, it's not just the impact it has on us personally, but then looking around at our family and community and realizing the ways that modern medicine has an important place. I'm certainly about integrating it, but I think there's also a lot of ways it's not serving us.
Just a quick break from the show to thank our presenting sponsor, Oshala Farm. Oshala Farm is a beautiful and vibrant certified organic herb farm based in Southern Oregon, where they grow and sell over 80 different plant species. The founders, Elise and Jeff Higley, have been longtime friends, so I highly trust their growing methods and ethics. You'll love the potency and vibrancy of all the herbs they have to offer. To learn more and purchase their herbs and other organic goods, head to oshalafarm.com. So thanks once again to Oshala Farm for sponsoring the Herbalist Hour. Now back to the show. Enjoy. So do you feel like herbalism is your calling?
I think it's really fair to say that. I feel like, especially the work that I'm doing here at Sage Mountain and the journey that it took me to get here is very much the plants and the trees and the mountain, calling me on this path. I think there's a lot of folks that I know, colleagues of mine, that kind of have a similar experience, because it is not necessarily a career that you see at the career fair with your high school counselor. It's definitely, for a lot of us, it's very entrepreneurial in nature. You really have to forge your own path, and that requires a little bit of creativity and intestinal fortitude and a really strong community of colleagues and mentors to support. So, yeah.
Intestinal fortitude. That's a perfect way to put that. I would love to hear more about, you traveled to Guatemala, was it? Mm-hmm. Sounds like you had somewhat of an herbal mentor there of sorts, but I'd love to hear more about your herbal journey. Who have been some of your mentors, etc.?
Yeah, when I came back to the United States, my first herbal teacher was named George Darcy. He was teaching and practicing in Orlando at the local herb shop, and I was, returning from Guatemala back to the United States. Spent a couple years studying in books and just sort of like exploring this as a hobby, and then met him and saw that he was teaching some classes, and he was really my first mentor that I apprenticed with. I worked with him with his clients for several years doing clinical shadowing, and then actually when he passed away was when I started studying with Rosemary, because I had at that point was teaching classes, was seeing his clients. He was sort of shifting into retirement anyway, but I at the time didn't feel like I was quite ready to just not have a mentor and a teacher to call on. So, and Rosemary had been one of George's teachers. George had a really interesting background. He studied with Dr. Christopher and with Rosemary. So I feel like it's these two somewhat divergent ways of approaching herbalism, but he was also, I think, similarly called into the work because he was a paramedic EMT, and he was really doing that profession to be of service, but feeling like he was just a taxi service to the hospital for people and not actually helping them. So that's how he switched into herbalism. So yeah, his teachings were kind of a weaving of that heroic cayenne for everything type of approach. In fact, I got stabbed with a saw palmetto frond while I was his student, and I did use a cayenne eye wash. It's not as bad as it sounds. But then he also had that sort of gentle, nurturing, wise woman approach that Rosemary, I think, really exemplifies. So
did it make sense, his style, like watching him work?
Yeah, I think it's not, there were certainly a lot of things that I took from it and a lot that I left behind, as I think we should with every teacher, kind of take what resonates with us and honor those teachings, but then kind of still forge a way that really speaks to our kind of relationship with the plants. So I don't offer cayenne eye washes regularly to folks. But I think for, especially that he was coming from that medical EMT background. So that's already like a way of really seeing the body in that sort of heroic linear way. So, so it worked. It worked for him. It worked for me as a student for sure. And then after he passed away, I was just really seeking some more learning and to sit at someone's feet more. And so, was really blessed to be able to then study with Rosemary in those final years as she was kind of phasing out teaching apprenticeships and advanced apprenticeships and teaching trainings and stuff. Once I started studying with her, I basically just kept kind of following after her as much as I could. I also really had the good fortune of having some teachers in Florida. Peggy Lance, who has been a teacher at our Florida Herbal Conference on many occasions. She's in her early 90s. She wrote the book Florida's Edible Wild Plants. And for me, she was really foundational as a teacher because George had learned from Dr. Christopher and Rosemary all of the herbs that grow in a region like this and not necessarily the subtropical plants that are native to Florida. So through Peggy, I was able to learn those native plants that were edible, and many of them were also medicinal as well. So that really, she helped anchor me in a bioregional practice. And I also was able to travel, had the privilege of traveling to places like Costa Rica and the Yucatan Peninsula and other places in the subtropical region where herbalism is a more central active practice of medicine than it, at least at the time, was in Florida. That's definitely changing and growing. Have a lot of grannies and grandpies in the Central Florida area that were immigrants to the United States that still had their sustenance farms with their fruits and veggies and herbs that no one else in the area knew of. That I would just walk by the house or ride a bike by someone's micro farm and be like, "Is that plant?" and build a relationship. So I really have a lot of those elders to thank for being able to deepen that relationship there. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would love to touch base a little bit on, I wasn't originally going to bring this up, but we probably should. We got Emily Ruff here. You founded the Florida School of Holistic Living.
Mm-hmm.
I would love for you to plug that. Also the Florida Herbal Conference, which I've been twice. Incredible event. Sounds like you might be stepping down from the head organizer role, but don't want to speak for you. Why don't you plug and promote a little bit of the Florida projects that you started? Yeah. Also, I'd love to hear you maybe talk about one of your favorite Florida plant allies.
I can do that. Yeah. So Florida School of Holistic Living was sort of the project that grew out of the little classes of 5 or 10 people that George was teaching in the back of the herb shop Leaves and Roots in Florida, and now offers a full curriculum from introductory classes all the way into preclinical training in not just the Central Florida, Orlando area, but also that we have a North Florida branch in the Tallahassee area held down by Christina Lynch, who's currently serving as the interim executive director for AHG, nice. A real herbal rock star and graduate of our programs, very carrying forth that torch. And we also offer a lot of online curriculum as well, seeking really to highlight the plants of Florida, but also teaching about a lot of the plants more temperate as well, and kind of making that really accessible. Maggie O'Halloran is the director of the school now, nice. And a real awesome. Blessing to be able to collaborate with another graduate of our program to see that carry on as I continued into other endeavors. And then one of the projects that we're really proud of at the school is the Florida Herbal Conference. We started that in 2012. It's actually a seed that was planted here at Sage Mountain. I was sitting in Rosemary's living room drinking some tea, and she said, there's all these herbalists in Florida. You should have a conference. And at the time, I really felt quite isolated in the herbal community. It was just sort of me and my students and my teachers that I had in Florida, many of those grannies that would never even call themselves herbalists, but certainly were. And I just kind of snickered at her. I said, "Yeah, right, Rosemary." There'd be like 3 people at that conference. But I sort of made a bargain with her. I was like, "Well, if you come keynote the first event, we'll see if we can pull off a conference." And well played, several years later, I was talking with my colleague Patty Colton at the school, who was the co-director at the time, and was like, "What do you think about this harebrained idea?" And we recruited Rosemary to be the keynote. We had 250 folks at our first event, and we've continued it annually to this day in COVID, we had 1 year that was virtual only, but it's been an in-person / a hybrid with virtual options in the years since COVID. This last year, we had some incredible keynote speakers. I mean, every year, I think the keynotes are just really incredible. This year, it was Mimi Hernandez and Seven Song. Prior year, it was Lucretia Van Dyke and Patricia Carizzi Howell. We've had Kat Meyer and David Winston, and just some amazing herbalists. And also, I think I'm really proud of that project. We always bring in 2 keynotes that are authors or elders in the community, folks that are maybe a little folks you wouldn't necessarily get to just see at your garden club or a regular workshop. But then the rest of the teaching roster is always teachers from the Florida area, so that we can really highlight folks that are teaching in Florida. And a big intention of that event was really to build community in Florida, so that you folks don't feel isolated there. So we're really proud of how far we've come, and I am still involved, but also really stepping back a bit to create space for the other leaders there that are so incredible to be able to step into their full shining of their leadership, and especially now that I'm full-time here in Vermont, just allowing the folks that are there full-time with those Florida plants to carry that vision forward. So it's really special. Yeah.
FloridaHerbalConference.org.
Yeah, FloridaHerbalConference.org. It's always in late February, early March. So folks that are up in northern climates trying to get away from winter, it's a great time to sneak down. And it's the impossible question to ask an herbalist to talk about one single plant that is a plant they adore. But I would say I really think about Biden's alba as one of the Florida plant allies that really has been a really close ally for me in the last 10, 15 years. There are Bidens that grow, Biden's frondosa, and there's other Biden species that grow in temperate climates. Biden's alba really thrives in Florida. It's a ubiquitous, most folks think of it as a weed and curse it as they're pulling it from their garden beds, but it's one of the most important plants for feeding pollinators in the state of Florida. It's an edible. You can cook it as a green. I used to have it in the morning every day with my eggs for breakfast. But it's an incredible broad spectrum antimicrobial and antibacterial that we're using from everything from Lyme co-infections to respiratory, like a deep cough that just is settled in your lungs and won't let go. One of the things that I relied on it heavily for when I was practicing in Florida was for MRSA. So many folks enter the hospital for one particular reason and leave with a MRSA infection and, the little skin lacerations and issues that can cause. And Biden's has just been profoundly helpful for treating things that can be difficult to find a pharmaceutical ally for. So, yeah.
Being at the Florida Herbal Conference, I want to say it's Bob Lindy, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a Florida herbalist, and I went on a plant walk with him at that event, and that's the main one I remember is the Bidens. And I want to say it grows not only just all over Florida, but also like when I go to New Orleans, I want to say I see it there as well.
Yeah, all throughout the coastal Gulf area. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, speaking of plants, why don't we take a little tour of Sage Mountain, check some plants out. Got more questions about Sage Mountain in general for you, but why don't we walk around and check the place out?
Sounds great.
Sweet.
So welcome to the Sage Mountain Gardens. Rosemary planted these in the early 90s, built these terraces, and we'll see some in the lower gardens. We have about 200 species of pollinator supporting plants, flowers, and herbs in these gardens. They are primarily perennials with some annuals sprinkled through. And over the decades that they've been here, it's really been both the plants that Rosemary kind of placed here and planted, and also allowing those plants to move and shift and cohabitate. So it's a little bit of a dance always for us. We have this beautiful echinacea patch back here that Rosemary has not quite up yet in flower, but that Rosemary planted, and we have some milkweeds that started to dot the landscape. And we really try to let those coexist and cohabitate as best as possible, because we want to honor the spirit of the wild here as much as the spirit of the manicured herb beds. So
it's absolutely beautiful. I'm seeing a lot of familiar plants, some I don't know, but just walking by that rose earlier, it's one of the most fragrant roses I've ever smelled before. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is wonderful.
Well, you want to walk through the paths?
Let's mosey.
Stop and smell the roses.
Let's get some smell-o-vision going here. So at some point, I would love to hear about the transition of you taking over, because Rosemary founded it back in 1987, as you said, and I don't know if now is a good time to hear that story, but yeah, as much detail or as little detail as you'd like to bring.
Yeah. Well, I've been a student here for about 20 years, and it was probably 5 years after I first came here that Rosemary and her husband Robert started to have a vision of moving to their next phase of life. This is 600 acres, 8 or 9 buildings, a lot of management, especially in the wintertime. And, you know, as they were aging, it was time for them to kind of think about passing that on to someone. And Rosemary spent many, many years turning down lots of offers, trying to find the right person to carry this forward. So it was in 2016 and 2017 that I realized I had been spending several years visiting in the summer and weeping as I was driving away, leaving, thinking that I might not be able to come back and visit these forests again and be in this space. And eventually I just said, what would it look like if I, you know, came here? And I'm from Florida. Yeah. I lived in a city for 20 years before this. I didn't know heck about winter before I came, but I knew that I loved this mountain, and I started to have that conversation with Rosemary about what it might look like. And having managed a large nonprofit organization and events and things, I had some sense of what work would be entailed to manage an organization like this and a center like this. I could never have fully known what it would look like until I just jumped in feet first. Yeah. And I've certainly had the fortune of having the mentorship and support of Robert and Rosemary every step of the way, to answer questions and provide encouragement. But, you know, at heart, I really desired not to have Emily Ruff's Sage Mountain, but for all the thousands of folks that have been touched by this land to be able to continue coming here, and more folks to be able to continue coming here, for this not to just be sold to a private landowner and then never have access again. Right. There's so many prayers have been planted in these forests over the last 40 years. So that was really kind of my intention, was this land just remain open and accessible for all the healing that it's given people over the years, and for that to continue. So I started a nonprofit organization to purchase the property and the center from Rosemary, and to carry on that legacy.
Awesome. So, very cool.
Yeah.
So it is officially an LLC now, so if folks want to donate.
A 501c3, yeah.
501c3, how would they go about donating?
SageMountain.com is our website. Have that all plastered over. And in fact, a lot of your folks, your viewers and followers, I'm sure were some of our supporters last summer.
Yeah.
Many folks know that last July there were some really historic and catastrophic floods that came through central Vermont, and in particular took out about 3/4 of a mile of our road, so we didn't have access for nearly 5 months, and it was through the generous support of a lot of people in the herb community all over the United States that we were able to be resilient through that struggle and be able to continue our programs here this year. So
going to take a moment to thank you, herbal community. We were just talking to Helen Ward about when we had that Oakland car theft, and we lost countless bits of content and computers and supplies, and the herbal community just came through and just donated and helped us out, and like it just makes me so happy to be part of such an amazing community. And then they came forward and helped y'all out here as well. Just amazing community, and you would never even know that the flooding happened, and it's great work getting it back on track and back in its beautiful form. So thanks everybody.
I would just have to echo that Orlando Grief Care Project in 2016, and then Standing Rock in 2016 and 2017, and Oakland, the floods.
Yeah.
I mean, there are countless examples of the herbal community really showing up for one another.
Yeah.
And I think that really exemplifies the generosity that the plants show us and all that they share with
Yeah.
us. So it's really beautiful to see the plant humans showing that in return and paying that forward. So
Well put. I love that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's keep moseying.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
one
Oh my
thing I'll
gosh.
point out is you'll see in many areas of the garden, Rosemary planted a lot of thyme, Thyme, so that she could have more time, Time. So I love that analogy and thinking about whether it is thyme or other plants, just how beautiful it is to be connecting with the plants as a way to just be present and sort of expand our understanding of our relationship with time by being in the garden. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Look
so
at
it's
these
poppy
poppies.
season right now.
It's gorgeous.
Got some obedient plant through here, some comfrey really showing off, some elecampane. One of the stars of the garden this season has been Solomon seal, right behind you here, Mason.
Yeah.
It's flowers are fading right now, but this was a gift from an herbalist in the community that we were able to bring some in. We have a little bit of Solomon seal in the forest here, and wanted to bring a little bit more into our garden. So yeah, valerian
There's
is
some
starting
valerian,
to take off in bloom in this bed, which is a lot of valerian and figwort and mugwort and plume poppy. Yeah, and then, yeah,
I was
go
just
ahead.
going to say, what kind of pollinators are you seeing out here?
We have so many different pollinators. We don't keep bees up here because it's really important for us to support the native pollinators.
Makes sense.
And we know that honeybees are so super important. And also up here, we want to really make sure that the native pollinators have the full breadth of the garden and don't have to compete. One in particular, the rusty butt bumblebee.
Rusty butt.
Is actually a little bit of
That's
a
awesome.
threatened pollinator species here in Vermont, and we see a lot of it, especially in the meadow. So we're really glad to see some of those monarch butterflies. Everyone knows have been really kind of threatened and having some challenges, but the monarchs are doing really good up here. That's one of the things that we do. We really try to document everything from what day does the Solomon seal bloom this year to what day do we see our first monarch in the garden, so that we can kind of have some data to compare year over year. How are the seasons changing? How is the climate changing? How are the plants and the pollinators and the animals adapting? We do the same for the wildlife neighbors that let us live in their home. We have a network of about 15 or 20 trail cameras throughout the property that watch the moose and the bear and the bobcat. Fox,
Yeah.
Fisher. Yeah, lots of these folks so that we can, just get to know our neighbors. And, it's from that trail camera monitoring that we get to see, the bear with her 3 cubs and like how early does she wake up every spring and like as her cubs get older and then they have their own. And so it's been a really beautiful way for us to not only get to know our neighbors, but also contribute some of that data to agencies like Fish and Wildlife and Natural Resources. So.
You ever seen moose in person?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, I have.
amazing.
There were 3 moose in the fen. That was my first sighting in person, and then that was about 3 years ago. And then the following spring, we were driving down the road to the post office, and a young moose was walking up the road, and so we just killed the engine, and he took about 20 minutes to meander up, and then walked like right outside of my window. And I think we have a video of it up on our YouTube channel. I was in tears, so it was not my most glamorous moment, but it was really stunning.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, one of my favorite trees in the garden is Hawthorn, and
Oh, this is a hawthorn.
yeah.
It's I've never seen one quite like this.
Yeah, there's one back there behind us too.
the species
And there's a
perchance?
couple others. I'd have to defer to Rosemary on that,
yeah.
but these hawthorn actually came from her grandmother's farm in California, and
Wow.
she planted them here. And we have a few down in the lower garden as well.
doing well.
And it is doing well, and gives us some beautiful white flowers, and then there's red fruit. In the autumn, I'm fond of making like hawthorn ketchup and other like tinctures and conserves and preparations. But just such a like heart centering herb, and I think so important. I think about the hawthorn and the roses as two of, I think really the most important herbs in the garden for how they support our heart. And I feel like I feel like every year when I do an interview with someone, I'm always like, heart herbs are the most important because we all have so much grief and trauma. And then every time I say that, 6 months later, 3 months later, a year later, I'm like, wow, it's even more so now. So
Yeah, definitely a personal plant ally for me as well. Yeah, we don't. I've never seen the species before, but yeah, I love it.
Yeah, one thing with the hawthorn that my neighbor Betsy Bancroft taught me just recently was thinking about carrying a thorn of the hawthorn tree as a little amulet or in your pocket or your purse, just for that protection. I think about rose and hawthorn, even motherwort and its spiky little seeds that are such an annoyance if you're doing garbling of seeds, and how pokey they are. Like, that thorniness really helps us create boundaries. And I think boundaries are so important for us processing our grief, like being able to have that kind of thorniness that lets our heart stay soft.
Yes.
I think about the thorns of the rose and like soft, sensuous petals of the flower, like that being like what we're really striving for when it comes to like being present with and feeling our grief, like feeling the boundary so we can feel safe to then be soft and vulnerable inside.
I've heard Jim McDonald say a similar thing about the amulet, the thorn. Yeah, it's a cool idea. I love that.
Yeah.
So, what kind of activities go on here at Sage Mountain, and who's welcome and when and all that jazz?
Cool. Well, everyone's welcome. We
great.
typically are open to the public June through October. And we occasionally have some winter activities too for folks that can access with 4-wheel drive. It is very snowy and steep up here in the winter. From June through October, we have what we call Day on the Mountain programs, which are Saturdays where you can come do a plant walk with Betsy Bancroft, have some nourishing lunch, and then spend the afternoon in the trails and the gardens and the pond and the libraries. Just kind of enjoy the mountain. We also have weekend programs. So this season we'll have 5 different weekend programs where retreats where you can come learn, relax, share some food, do some harvesting, plant walks. We're doing 4 in 2024 with Betsy and I called Healing with the Elements.
I saw that.
Each weekend we'll have a different element. And then these retreats are really intended to be a mix of like learning and relaxing and restoring and reconnecting with the land. So really getting a chance to appreciate why we call this a sanctuary. It's a sanctuary for plants, animals, and humans. And then we'll also have a weekend in fall with Todd Lynch on forest bathing, nature, therapy, and art. Where we get to be really immersive in the woods.
What kind of art's going to happen?
We make all sorts of like incredible art with the plants and the items that we find in nature, and just art in the landscape that's then left in the landscape.
Look who it is.
It's our neighbor Betsy.
Yay.
So this is a 3-acre calcareous fen. This is a really rare type of cedar swamp. There are very few acres of this in the area. So we're really proud of this ecosystem being part of what we're stewarding here at Sage Mountain. And today we're hiking back on the edge of the fen so as to not disturb its really delicate soils, to see one of the queens of the mountain, Cypripedium reginae, also known as the showy lady slipper. Last year we did an inventory of the lady slippers and we counted over 3,000 of them here in this fen.
Wow.
We also have yellow lady slippers a little bit further up in the fen. Those bloom first, so those have already passed. These typically bloom around summer solstice, and everything in the gardens and in the forest is a week or 2 early this year because the summer, we didn't have a snow on the daffodils. We didn't have a snow in May. We typically do, and we didn't this year, so the schedule is a little bit ahead for pretty much all of our plant life here. So
So you knew that the schedule was ahead, so you came down here a little early to check on the lady slippers, and there they were. That's awesome.
Yeah. Starting in late May, we're on alert this year so that we don't miss them, because they're only up for really about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks, depending on how mild it is. We're expected to get a warm spell next week, so it'll probably speed up their blooming and their passing. So it's very fortuitous that you are here this week visiting, so you have a chance to see these, because like I said, I think this is really one of the stars of the show here at Sage. I mean, the gardens are beautiful, the forest is amazing, but rare plants like these, and especially in such density and such quantity, to have several thousand of them that we've vouched here, is just really remarkable. We're really proud of what nature does in this space, and blessed to be able to witness it every year.
Any insect relationships that you're aware of?
Yeah, there are some incredible pollinators. These lady slippers are specifically pollinated by some specific six-leggeds. I have a short list in the office that I can share with you about them. They're definitely, it's a very unique set of insects that pollinates these.
Yeah. They are beautiful.
Yeah.
So showy.
Showy, yeah. They've earned their name well.
Yeah.
And we also have some of the pink lady slippers, which have a slightly smaller flower and have more of the red on the outside with the pink in the middle. But these are really the quantity and the density, and they go all the way down. So in the floods last year, the waterways and the streams and stuff kind of shifted a little, and I did a lot of hiking through here after the flood, and you could see the remnants of these kind of way far down into the woods.
Yeah, they look almost like they're in bud right there. They just start popping soon.
Yeah, there's some real pregnant ones getting ready to open right up that way. So
thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thanks for coming to the Fen.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you about is if there's any story that you're aware of about the castles.
Yeah, so these castles were built in the early 90s by Ed Foisey, lovingly known as Uncle Eddie in this community. We have 3 castles here at Sage that he built, as well as a number of fairy doors in the bases of trees and other nooks in the garden. Uncle Eddie's from Cape Cod, and as I understand it, these castles and fairy doors are really about restoring our kind of childlike vision and enchantment of nature, and reminding all of us stodgy adults like that fairies still exist, which I think for the herbal crowd is not a hard sell.
No,
but
not at
it's
all.
quite amazing. So we have 3 of them. We have this entry one and 2 in the gardens, and it's really amazing to see like the electric company or the guy that comes to pump the septic, like folks that are not here to visit Sage but are visiting Sage, just really being enamored by these. So he's cracked the code to kind of help us in our adult minds move back into our childlike minds and hearts.
It's not just the castles, but there's other statues and stuff around that are they just really bring out that childlike quality in you. Like the gal blowing the windmill in the upper garden. Yeah. I love that one.
Yeah. We also invite folks all summer and fall to come have private retreat or group retreats here at Sage. We have 4 cabins that folks can rent, and folks can also camp out and just spend a weekend or a couple days or a week, whether in solitude or with family and friends, just disconnecting from Babylon and reconnecting to nature and filling your cup before you go home.
Now, are you using any herbs here to make your own like personal medicine, or like to sell as a Sage Mountain type of product or anything
Personal
like that?
medicine, absolutely. And with like our weekend programs, we do a lot. Like our first weekend with Betsy will be on air element, and we'll be really focusing on nettle, making some nettle vinegar and some nettle food. So we use the herbs with the kids, make different preparations and teach them about those plants. And we have like sometimes selective seasonal stuff in our gift shop. We also have a full line of Sage Mountain flower essences.
Sweet.
That'll be available on our website.
Did you start that?
Later this year? Yeah.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah, it was actually just kind of like a labor of love and like a project of like capturing the energy of the mountain when I was a student here. And every time I would come, I would just like find myself making more and more flower essences. So then when I moved in, I was like, this would be a great thing to share with folks. So
is there a lady slipper
soon.
essence?
There is.
Of course. All right, so is this officially called the Lower Garden, or did I make that up?
It's unofficially the Lower Garden,
Okay.
but that is what we call it, yeah. So sort of the Upper Garden and the Lower Garden. Over in the shady zone here under the trees is where you'll see a lot of the at-risk medicinals like the wild ginger, and the cohoshes, golden seal, bloodroot, kind of take up this zone, and then moving into mints and lilies and echinacea and elecampane, angelica, all sorts of medicinals.
I don't
Like
suppose the
said-
wild ginger's blooming right now.
I don't know, let's take a look.
Let's take a look-see, yeah. What were you going to say, though?
We have about 200 species between the flowers and the herbs in these gardens, and every season it transforms a little bit. Also some wild strawberries, ripe right now, so you
these all
see a little
violet
red.
leaves?
Violets,
Yeah.
yeah, we have
gonna
at
say, 'cause
least
they kinda-
5 different species of violets.
Gotcha. At least in Oregon, the violets could almost be mistaken the leaves for the wild ginger. Like they look kind of
Totally.
similar, yeah. Oh,
Yeah, no blooms on it
No.
that I can see. There's
Yeah.
there's several patches of it as we work our way down. No flowers yet on the golden seal, but any day now.
yeah. Got your garden gnome.
Kind of requisite.
Yep. Gotta have it. Comfrey.
So this comfrey actually came from Adele Dawson's garden. I don't know if you know Adele.
I don't.
She wrote Herbs, Partners, and Partners in Life. Herbs, Partners in Life.
Okay. What's the
and-
thesis of that book?
What's that?
What's the thesis of that book?
Yeah,
or-
it's just a beautiful book with like herbal recipes and remedies and talking
Cool.
about the healing qualities of the herbs. And so Adele was sort of like a legendary elder herbalist in Vermont when Rosemary moved here. Deb Sewell studied closely with
Yeah.
Adele and had a close relationship with her. Adele was well into her 90s when she passed away. And yeah, it's sort of one of those kind of teachers of our teacher, I think. So these
that.
came from Adele's garden, another herb flower that's not quite up yet, but will be soon, are hollyhocks. We have some, I mean, the plant itself they just haven't shot up their flower stalk yet. We have a beautiful collection of different hollyhock here that came from Tasha Tudor's garden.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar
I'm
with
not
her, but she
familiar.
was another herbalist in New England. She was an artist. She wrote a lot of kids' books and was well known as a gardener. So they're sort of two of our sort of like ancestral lineage influence on the herbalists that you and I have probably studied under, at least in the New England area. So it's a real gift to have some of their plants from their garden in our garden.
I love that there's a story like that, and I suppose that there's lots of plants around Sage Mountain where you're like, oh, this came from that person's garden. And since we stayed with Rosemary, she's gifting us with a little Schisandra start. And I'm like, oh, sweet, we're going to have a little Rosemary Schisandra in our yard. But then she told us that it came from Nancy Phillips.
Yeah.
So kind of by way of Nancy Phillips. So
Yeah.
I love that you're able to have those stories. And I suppose we got this comfrey from, remind me of her name one more time.
Adele Dawson.
Adele Dawson. And do you suppose that comfrey as well probably came
Yeah,
from Adele
absolutely.
Dawson?
All the comfrey here, and like the Hawthorn coming from Rosemary's
Right.
grandmother's farm
yeah.
in California.
Do you have any other plants that come to mind of where they might have came from, or is that putting you on the spot?
Probably lots.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking about our wild yam. Came from one of the UPS board members eons ago.
Okay.
He gifted to Rosemary, and I know Rosemary in her travels would often collect plants.
Sure. Yeah.
Bring them here, so I think there's a lot of those stories, some of which still need to be documented.
Totally. I love that. Awesome. I suppose this is kind of the end of the road over here.
Yeah, well, there's actually, this is not the most like film-worthy part, just fair warning.
Yeah.
But And partly because we didn't get down here and trim yet this morning. He was going to trim a bunch of stuff this morning. And I was like, Mason's coming in the morning, actually. Can't trim. But this, just for y'all to know, this mugwort, and then there's also a bunch of nettle down here. It's kind of like colonized the meadow. So we do mow it, but it's like a nice like
mugwort
weaving
nettle.
In of those
How
herbs.
strong is the sting on that nettle?
Pretty.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I don't want to try it.
We're just starting to get
A little St. John.
hints of buds.
Nice.
Yeah, usually around solstice it is in bloom, and it looks like it's right on time.
My friend Kyle Denton, he's an herbalist in Milwaukee. He calls it solstice wort.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a perfect name for it.
Yeah.
And the poppies and peonies coexisting. We didn't get to show the audience the trails and the forest here. We did get to see the fen a little bit, but I think it's really, as beautiful as these gardens and landscapes are, I think the really important part of Sage Mountain is the nearly 600 acres of forest that we have, and the intact corridor that we're a part of. And these large landscapes are becoming more and more rare. And so I hope you all have a chance to hike through a little bit before you go today. Yeah. And I think, that for me is one of the spaces that I really enjoy watching our visitors get to reconnect in the forest. It's a really not old growth, but older forest. And there's, like I said, been so many thousands upon thousands of prayers planted in those forests. And I think anytime we walk into a wild, sacred landscape like that, and we acknowledge the sentience of that landscape, then that landscape comes alive. You know, that ecosystem in turn, like there's some force, some numinous force that I think is really palpable when we go into the woods or a meadow or a lake and acknowledge the like living spirit of that place. So it's something that I think is really palpable and really alive here. And whether you come for a weekend program or just a day visit or camp out overnight, it's I think one of the special parts of this place is getting to connect with that spirit of the mountain, as Rosemary would call it.
Okay, so there's the concept we're trying to think about at Herb Rally, herbal tourism. And it almost has like this negative connotation, sound like tourism. But at the same time, like I could picture someone, just an herbalist, coming to Vermont and just having, a field day, so to speak. Like there's so many different herbal things to do. You'd have to stop at Sage Mountain. So if someone was traveling from out of state, where you would fly into Burlington, I suppose.
Burlington, Manchester, New Hampshire are the two kind of larger airports. Some people come in from Boston and do a little Western Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont tour, depending on their access to transport. And it's really, as you saw, like that state road at the bottom of our mountain makes it actually, we're way out, but we're actually quite accessible to Babylon and civilization, as it were.
Exactly.
And I think I agree that, just even that word tourism kind of has this connotation of, extraction and consumerism and commodification of nature. At the same time, I know, having spent 20 years as an herbalist in the middle of a really large city, how important it was for me to sustain my practice by remaining connected to the landscape and to these wilder places. And not that, I'm also a big proponent that if you're an herbalist in a city, there's, the wild nature is in the crack of every sidewalk. And so there's like still something to be said for finding that wildness in the city. Absolutely. But I think it's also really invaluable for us to keep our tea kettle full so that we can pour into the teacups of those we serve. And a place like this was that for me when I was living in a city, and I hope will continue to be that for folks that get to visit us.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a lot of fun, Emily. Thanks for the tour. Amanda and I are definitely going to check out some of the trails. Where's an entry point for us? Where do we go?
Up by the yurt.
Over by the yurt? All right, cool. Yeah, we'll definitely do that. But thanks, y'all, for joining. If you're watching on YouTube, definitely leave a comment with any of the things you're excited about coming and checking out at Sage Mountain. Again, this is, I want to say it's Orange, Vermont. Definitely check it out. Thanks so much for joining us. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Herbalist Hour.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much for watching today's episode of the Herbalist Hour. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want more great herbal content, be sure to subscribe to our Herbalist YouTube channel. If you enjoy these Herbalist Hour episodes and you'd like to join us live, you can do so by becoming an Herbalist Schoolhouse member. Learn more at herbalist.com/schoolhouse. And if you want to get your first 30 days for free, use coupon code YouTube30 at checkout. So our Herbalist Schoolhouse members get access to exclusive video classes, monographs, and a lot more herbal community discounts, along with joining these live Herbalist Hour interviews. So one more time, herbalist.com/schoolhouse. Enter coupon code YouTube30 at checkout to get your first 30 days for free. All right, we'll see you in the next episode, and take care.